Hello and welcome to One Week, One Year, a podcast where we discuss a year of film history every week-ish, starting from 1895, the dawn of cinema. This week, we're talking about 1918. I'm one of your hosts, Chris Ellie. I am a film projectionist, and joining me as always is...
I am Glenn Covell. I am a filmmaker and the other host.
Yes. How's it going, Glenn? What's up?
It's going, Um, things are things are kind of happening, I guess.
Yeah, you made a short film.
I did. I think we talked about that last episode, whenever
Yes.
that was that we recorded it.
You submitted to some festivals, though?
Yeah,
You know?
same,
Yeah.
no change. I still don't know if I got into any. So,
What's going on with you personally, then?
I'm working from home and I am listening to a lot of other podcasts besides this one. And I don't know, it's kind of walking around the neighborhood trying to be outside now that the weather is getting nicer in springtime. Not much else. Going to movie trivia at the Nighthawk Prospect Park, which is fun. Shout out
You live in New York City.
to them. I do. I live in the borough of Brooklyn. Like the pretentious asshole that I am.
I live in Denver, Colorado now, which I can partially blame for why it's our episodes came out so late as they did. But anyway, yeah, I am kind of transitioning to become maybe not a projectionist soon. But
Gasp.
I don't know. I feel like I'll still be a projectionist in my heart. So, and
In
it kind of
spirit.
rolls off the tongue
Yeah.
for the intro a little better. So,
Once
you
you're
know.
a projectionist, you're always a projectionist.
it's true. It's true. Yeah, but I might start working at the Department of Transportation.
I mean,
A government job.
not much more exciting than that.
It's the nonstop, fast-paced world of repairing traffic lights,
Hell yeah.
which I'm actually pretty excited for. Anyway, I want y'all listening to know that you can, if you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead. You're doing a bang up job. If you are listening to this on a podcast, you can watch it on YouTube, which, of course, there's nothing wrong with listening to it as a podcast. But on YouTube, we will play the movies along while we're with our talking about them, and you get to kind of experience a little bit of that. It's copyright free, so we can do whatever we want. And for both YouTube and podcast people, we're going to make a playlist of videos on our channel that is all the movies that we'll be talking about, and you can watch them on YouTube right there. If you want to watch them with music or separately from our yammering, With that being said, we like to start off our episodes with a little bit of context for what was happening in the year that we're talking about. So, Glenn, why don't you take it away with the news of the year?
The news of the year, 1918. Influenza strikes the world. Millions lost in the deadly pandemic. Daylight savings time begins. The Red Baron is shot down and killed during an air battle near the Somme River. Women gain the right to vote in the UK and Canada. The Romanovs are shot and killed. Kaiser Wilhelm abdicates the throne. The Great War ends with the shining of the November 11th armistice. And, a bunch of other stuff that is probably somewhat important. But, you know what? 1918 was a wild year, so we needed to keep it brief.
It was, and we're talking about a lot of movies in this episode.
Yes,
so
we are. We got to keep this ball rolling.
Let's get this ball rolling. What do you want to start with, Glenn?
I think we should start with what are our different segments. We should probably start with shorts. I guess we didn't do any movie serials for 1918 because there were so many other movies to watch.
Yeah, we could have watched Judex, which is supposed to be good, but no.
Yeah, I'm sure it's awesome, and I would like to watch it someday.
Yeah.
But it is too much. And we've covered a lot of the other sort of French adventure serials.
So this is our segment called One Week, One Reel, and most of these are not one reel at this point. But,
oh no, we are well beyond the one reel film. They are several reels, but it is a catchy title, so we're keeping it.
So we have often glanced over in a lot of ways, passed over a lot of the slapstick comedians that are kind of like the most iconic silent film stars.
Mm.
Um, and so we're trying to rectify that by you want to start off with Harold Lloyd
Sure, yeah.
because we haven't done any of his stuff yet. And so this week we watched Harold Lloyd's Take a Chance.
I definitely was very familiar with Harold Lloyd, but I don't think I've ever actually watched very many of his movies.
I was not familiar with him like at all, and I was so unfamiliar with him that I thought his iconic hanging from a clock scene was actually like Buster Keaton, you know?
Mm. Yeah, it is sort of, I think, until you really kind of get into it, I think a lot of these kind of silent film comedy stars can blend together a little bit. They're all wearing their straw butter hats and, you know, jumping trains and hanging off clocks and things.
Yeah.
Um, and I definitely have kind of suffered a bit from the, I guess, just sort of narrow view of this entire like time period and subgenre of movies. So I hadn't seen a lot of Arbuckle. I hadn't seen a lot of Buster Keaton. I hadn't seen a lot of Harold Lloyd. I'd really only seen a couple of Chaplin movies, and that was about it. So I'm happy to get into the rest of these. And this is a good little intro, I guess. It seems fairly exemplary of the types of movies that Harold Lloyd is making at this time.
You've seen other Harold Lloyd stuff?
No,
Okay. You're just familiar with him as a guy.
I'm familiar with him hanging off the clock from Safety Last. Is
Right.
the big one, you know.
Gotcha. Harold Lloyd started out being a bit of a Chaplin impersonator. So he had a character named Lonesome Luke, which he played in 1916 or so, when he was closer to when he was getting started, 1915 and 1916. And he was like literally dressed up like Chaplin, like the tramp outfit, and doing more of a Chaplin bit. But he developed his own character who I guess didn't necessarily have a name, but he called Glasses because of his iconic round glasses.
Right.
And he debuted him in the previous year, in 1917, but then this is one of his more famous movies from the more established Glasses era. What do you think of this character of his?
It is kind of a quintessential or sort of like very classical silent movie slapstick character, I guess. I do kind of feel like having watched, some other silent comedies from the last couple years, Take a Chance has a sort of madcap energy that is, I think certainly compared to what Chaplin has been doing, sort of sticks out in that regard. It has a bit more of a focus on kind of like outrageous stunts and wild gags, as opposed to the sort of like complex choreography and like pathos of the last couple Chaplin movies.
Yeah, though I will say that like this, I think madcap energy is a good way to put it because I felt like in the stunts and in the motion and in the cinematography too, this was like a lot more energetic than a lot of other stuff that I've seen. It's like less of a static camera situation. It's more speed ramping. It's less kind of a thing happens in a frame and somebody kind of mugs for a while. It's like full of motion and quicker cuts, I felt like.
Yeah, there's definitely, and this is not the first movie to feel that way. Like there's been a lot of was it Millie's Punctured Romance? Was that what it was?
Yeah.
That had a very strong sort of like madcap energy. I think a lot of the Arbuckle shorts have a kind of a similar energy to this also. But it's interesting to see sort of the different approaches that that the different kind of silent film comedy people are taking, and how they're all coming from a very similar place, but they're all starting to kind of find their lane a bit, which is interesting to see play out as we go along.
Yeah. I think he's established himself as a different type of person than the way that than Chaplin is. Like his character seems like more of like a human person instead of like a cartoon of a person, compared to like a Chaplin or an Arbuckle. I feel like he like is a guy who speaks to people and doesn't just like kind of twirl his twiddle his mustache back and forth.
He's a bit less. He's a bit less pantomimey. He acts more like an actual person would in a real situation, as opposed to, the Chaplin thing. It is kind of funny to think about that the like glasses character and the glasses look and like his hair and things like that. Or when he did that, it was just like, I'm just gonna wear glasses. But now it's like, oh, it's like an iconic look. It's sort of like the Tramp. Also, he's like, he just wore a hat and big shoes. It's like not. He just like came up with it one day. It's like, I don't know how much thought they were necessarily putting into these sort of these like looks that they were establishing that they would kind of carry on with for the rest of their careers, pretty much. Yeah. There's a lot of sitting in liquids in this movie. That's a big gag. They like that one a lot.
I feel like this has callbacks to a lot of very early silent comedy in a lot of ways. There's people in barrels rolling down hills.
Yeah, which is a weirdly really big trend in silent comedies. Like, so many barrels.
There's a scene where a lot of cops chase one guy in a kind of zany way, like dozens of cops.
Yeah.
And there's also a sticky glue thing on the ground. Which are all just Elise Guy Blaché late 1890s,
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, it's true. I think all of those are in Elise Guy Blaché movies, especially the barrels.
I can't even describe the plot. It's like a lot of stuff happens.
It's like these movies do not even have plots in the traditional sense. They are very much just like a bunch of things happen.
Yeah.
And this one especially, like this one is, I think, even more plotless than a lot of the other ones that we've been watching.
So you want to move on to another one, maybe The Cook by Fatty Arbuckle and Buster Keaton?
Yeah, that makes sense to talk about next. This one has a little bit more of a plot, but even then it's still like, there is a cook and hijinks happen.
Yeah. It's the same as most of these Fatty Arbuckle shorts have been, where it's the first half is like one gag, one set piece where they wring everything they can, and the second half is a barely related set piece that they wring everything they can out of.
Yeah, this one is definitely pretty similar in that regard to the ones that we watched from 1917. It's got showing off more of Arbuckle's knife skills, which he's very good at, like throwing knives up in the air and catching them and like throwing them into wood blocks and chopping stuff up. So yeah, in this, Arbuckle plays the titular cook, and Buster Keaton plays a horny waiter.
Yes, and it does seem like they really are kind of finding a real rhythm as a duo with this movie, or at least among the other ones that they've done. I think they work really well together in this.
Yeah, they have a kind of their sort of personas, I guess, complement each other pretty well, and they're kind of differing energies. Buster Keaton has such a sort of like dry, sort of he underplays things a lot.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas Fatty Arbuckle's like throwing plates up in the air and catching them, and like,
it's not even stunts. It's like juggling that he loves to do. Yeah.
It's just sort of like feats of daring, just spectacle, I guess. There's also Luke the dog returns in this and does a lot of chasing and biting people.
And there's like a mean clown that's the through line between both of the halves of this short.
Right. Yeah. Who eats a bottle and cuts off a guy's mustache and makes him eat it. There's a prolonged chase where the dog chases him up a ladder. There's a bunch of silly spaghetti eating, which feels like a I don't think I've seen that in a silent comedy up till this point, but it feels like a classic silent comedy gag.
They get a lot of mileage out of different silly ways to eat spaghetti.
Yeah, there's a whole scene that is just eating spaghetti in different silly ways.
including like a proto Lady and the Tramp situation, but like across a long table, and then the spaghetti pulls so taut that that it becomes a clothesline and they hang the napkins on it. Good gag. Good gag.
I feel like the sort of structure of these kind of Arbuckle Keaton comedies is a lot of times they will just kind of cut to a joke happening as opposed to sort of coming up with a narrative reason for it to happen. They don't necessarily come out of plot or story or anything like that. It's just sort of like, and now some spaghetti, and now this. These sort of, I guess the first part is all in a restaurant and a kitchen, and the second part is kind of at the boardwalk. I tried really hard to find out which boardwalk this was by looking at historical photographs from the 1910s of like different California boardwalks, and they all look so similar. I was trying to look like aerial photos, things like, oh, if that's this like Ferris wheel here on this side of the board, like, and I don't know, I think it's Santa Monica, but I can't be sure. There were so many boardwalks along like the California coast and like Los Angeles in particular that it's like nearly impossible to tell. But it did lead me down a whole rabbit hole of looking up 1918 boardwalk photos.
Should we flip over Chaplin?
Sure. I think there is. I hate to give him more time, but I do feel like there's kind of more to talk about with these, just because they were a bit more kind of narratively ambitious, I guess.
Yeah.
I feel like his movies are much more focused on telling stories as opposed to just sort of like setting up gags.
I think especially now, like his movies have always been a bit slower paced than the other two and more story focused, I guess. But these ones I felt like had a lot more of a, I don't know, a lot more of a sense of continuity. And in a way, not as many laughs because it is, you know, it's actually taking time to tell a story in these two.
Yeah. And yeah, I do think there's less of a sort of, as insanely silly as these movies are, they have less of that kind of like madcap, like every second a joke is happening kind of energy that the other ones tend to go for.
These are Shoulder, Arms, and A Dog's Life, by the way.
Yeah. I guess we'll talk about A Dog's Life first, because I think that's kind of the slightly more traditional, or it's a bit more similar to the other ones.
Mm-hmm.
A Dog's Life was his first film with a new production company, which was First National Pictures, which started out as a theater and distribution company before moving into producing movies. And they were later bought by Warner Brothers. This is the first time that Chaplin's older brother, half-brother, I should say, Sidney Chaplin, appears in one of his movies. They both came up in the English theater scene. And Sidney, I think after Chaplin moved to California, and they started making movies together. And then later on, Sidney became Charlie's kind of agent and manager. But I didn't know. And
I'm kind of surprised after Charlie Chaplin being like the most famous person in the universe for the last couple of years that he didn't get involved sooner. You know?
Yeah, I mean, I think Sidney was in some of the like Keystone movies and things, but always kind of in like a, you know, he's just one of the other kind of actors in the background. He never really had a prominent part. He doesn't really have a hugely prominent part in this either. But I don't know, I thought that was a, sort of an interesting. They mentioned this, I think, in the Robert Downey Jr. movie, but I don't remember that movie very well. So, I didn't really remember this whole thing of like, oh yeah, he had another brother who was also into like slapstick comedy that he made movies with.
Well, I guess we'll be watching that movie for the decade wrap up. So
oh sure, yeah,
yeah. I mean, I feel like the main kind of thrust of this movie is that he is, you know, he's a tramp, he's poor, and he
as per usual,
and he finds a dog and he has adventures with the dog.
It's like that's just cheating. You can't just like put a cute. I mean, Fatty Arbuckle and Buster Keaton did that this year also, but it is like
this is a cuter dog.
It is. put a cute dog in your movie and it's automatically charming, and it's just like, God damn it. I'm suddenly very invested in what's happening, because this also in The Cook, it's just like, oh yeah, there's a dog there, he like chases people and like does tricks and things. This is like really ringing out the like pathos of, there's a cute dog and it's in trouble and you gotta make sure it's taken care of, and it like it's a scrappy, tramp like he is, and they're living on the streets together.
Yeah, it's heartfelt in a lot of ways.
It is, yeah.
But I feel like it's very enjoyable to watch. But the main things that I left in my notes were like the really good gags in this too. One that I really loved and is also dog related and cute is that a lot of it involves him trying to get into this nightclub to get some food or drinks there or whatever, and there are no dogs allowed, and so initially he brings the dog in and gets kicked out, and so then he stuffs the entire dog in his pants,
as you do,
as if you're an adventure game character, and because he's a tramp and he has a hole in his pants, the dog's tail sticks out of the hole in the back of his pants and wags, and everyone stares at him, and it's very good. And then I also love that there's in the club there's somebody who is singing a kind of sad, beautiful opera song, and everyone in the club starts crying, and then there's a lady who cries so much that it looks like the Airplane movie Sweat gag.
Yeah. Another fun part of the tail coming out of his pants is that he walks by a drum, and the tail starts hitting the drum.
Yeah.
There are so many instances of like just really good physical comedy in these that I'm just like, it's so simple, but it works really well. Frequent Chaplin co-star Edna Purviance shows up in this as a woman who works at the nightclub, and her boss sort of angrily tells her that she needs to wink at more of the guests so they'll buy more drinks. And she starts like really aggressively winking at the tramp, and he is just kind of confused by it, and she has to tell him, "I'm flirting."
That was really good. I thought that she was really funny in that role.
Yeah. I wrote down a lot of like gags for this one that it might be not worth just describing one by one.
Just watch the movie. I mean, that's the thing that I feel like I have to tell to the listeners of this podcast is, I don't know how much you're getting from us like describing slapstick gags.
Yeah.
And I think that our recommendation is that you just sit down and watch these because they're fun.
Yeah. One thing I thought of this and several other silent comedies from this year is that how much in silent comedies that police are just sort of like default bad guys.
Yeah.
They're very silent comedies are very ACAB movies. Is what I wrote down. Like a policeman in a silent comedy is never helpful.
That's
like
true.
They're only there to like chase people
and get things wrong and be mean.
Yeah, pretty much. And I think that's kind of funny that they are like the furthest thing from propaganda possible. They are like anti-propaganda.
Yeah. Based. I mean, did you have anything else to say on A Dog's Life?
Oh, it's funny. It's sweet. There's a puppy in it. There's like, at the end of the movie, the tramp and Edna retire to the country, and the Scraps has puppies, and it's very.
Oh, the dog's name is Scraps. I forgot.
His name is Scraps. There's a title card at the beginning that says Scraps, a thoroughbred mongrel, which is a great little intro title card. But yeah, I think we can move on to the other big Chaplin short from this year,
which is Shoulder Arms.
Yeah, this one I was somewhat familiar. Like when I saw this one, I was like, "Oh, this movie." I'd never seen it before, but I feel like there's a lot of just like images from it that I
really
recognized.
Huh.
Yeah.
It's I think it's really well put together.
Yeah.
I think that even more than A Dog's Life, it is telling like a story. Um, in that it's an actual like kind of war adventure story with Chaplin gags in the middle.
Hmm.
Um, involving like including like him uh, uh, going out on a suicide mission and then like meeting a lady in like bombed out France or something like that, and
It's
then
really it
having to
is
like scheme with her to like defeat the
yeah.
Germans,
It is at parts of it. It is weirdly similar to the movie 1917, but in a much sillier
yeah,
way.
yeah,
Um,
silly 1917.
yeah, Edna Purviance is also in this and plays a French woman that sort of shows up in a bombed out house that he's hiding out in. This I think is funny that it kind of functions as like World War One propaganda, kind of, but then I feel like Charlie Chaplin undercuts that a little bit
Hmm.
by with the twist ending, which is that it was all a dream. So yeah, the movie starts with Chaplin, I guess, kind of playing the tramp. I mean, it's his same comic persona. He's not dressed the same, but
Except that he has a pith helmet, or I don't know if that's the right terminology. He has like a helmet, an army
like
helmet
a
that
doughboy
evokes
helmet.
his a doughboy helmet
Yeah.
that like looks like his bowler hat, and he uses it
Right.
in a very
Yeah.
similar way, which is genius. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. It does start with him signing his name and putting out a picture of himself over the title, just so we know that he is in fact in the movie. So like it starts off with him in I guess boot camp, and there's some sort of like soldier training antics that sort of acts I guess as a framing device, because then he goes into a tent and falls asleep, and we think the rest of the movie is after he wakes up, but it's actually all a dream. But yeah, we get like a really cool like tracking shot through a trench. There's a lot of focus on like life on the front and like the minutia
Yeah.
of that, which kind of surprised me that it's like this does sort of function as a pretty effective like World War One movie, even though it's played as like a big broad comedy, which is kind of wild that it's like this war is happening while this
Right.
movie is being
Yeah.
made, and it's like it's so silly. I mean, to a degree, it's like I think it does get. I was surprised how I guess like accurate the depiction of life in the trenches was, having seen like the Peter Jackson documentary They Shall Not Grow Old, and how like that really focuses a lot on like
Hmm.
life in the trench and like what the day-to-day of that was like, and it's like a lot of those details are in this of like the mud and like bailing there's a whole thing where like they're sleeping in like a dugout sort of room, and it floods, and they're like trying to sleep as like their beds are floating around and things. That's something that I realize will always impress me, is a flooding set. That was also in
Right.
there was another movie we watched recently that had a flooded set that I was like, ah, flooded sets are always impressive. There's a bit where someone's like unwrapping some stinky food, and so he puts on a gas mask.
That's amazing. I thought that was hilarious. Like stinky cheese, Limburger
Right.
cheese.
It's like oh, it's gas mask, and it's like that's kind of a dark joke. Like
It's really, and then he throws it at the Germans. It's
yes,
chemical
exactly.
warfare with stinky cheese.
It's like the fact that they're taking the fact that they're using real poison gas in a war that's happening at the time and being like, it's like throwing stinky cheese at each other. You know, I don't know. It's
yeah,
like,
it's chemical warfare, but make it silly. You know.
yeah. So that I guess that kind of surprised me. Is one, how accurate it was at like getting the details right, but then also playing a lot of those details in a comedic way.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a bit where he's like shooting a rifle and like making tally marks, and then like he gets shot at back, and he like rubs one of the tally marks off. So there's like a long, not a long, but there's like a section of it that's just sort of like his kind of like minutia day-to-day life in the trench, and then he volunteers for a dangerous mission behind enemy lines, and we cut to him dressed as a tree, looking like Groot.
or Treebeard. And he yeah, and he's dressed as a tree so convincingly that the dumb Germans just can't even detect that there's a face in it. Um,
That was one of the images that I had seen before of just like him dressed as
okay.
a tree walking around.
They get some really good bits out of him, people kind of walking near him and then him just like bonking them on the head and then turning
Yeah,
back into a tree
he does
again.
a lot of head bonking in this movie. He finds the bombed out house where the French woman shows up, and kind of nurses his wounds in a very, I guess that's a bit of a cliche of like, the soldier goes in the house and like a beautiful
Yeah.
woman appears. What luck! And there's some kind of language barrier jokes which, I guess play well. I have it written down which play well in silent film. I don't remember if that's sarcastic or not. But then the Germans show up and they have to escape, or he escapes, and their Proviance is captured by the Germans, and so then he has to follow them back to their headquarters, and he comes down a chimney and burns some butts with a hot poker, and then
Classic Charlie Chaplin butt humor.
yeah, loves that. Then the Kaiser himself shows up, and there's some antics involving Charlie Chaplin pretending to be a German officer. Like the officer, he like puts on a uniform and acts like a fancy officer guy, which is also like such a classic war movie thing of like put on the uniform and like
Yeah.
there's
You're a little
things
short
like,
for a stormtrooper.
yeah, exactly. That's like such a thing. They both disguise themselves and they kidnap the Kaiser and bring home the bacon, as it says in one of the intertitles.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, like it's like, oh, they kidnapped the Kaiser and won the war, and then it's the last scene is him waking up in the tent that he went into sleep at the beginning. His Sidney Chaplin plays both the Kaiser and also like the American sergeant that is kind of drilling him at the beginning. Fun movie.
So another World War I related short that we watched was The Sinking of the Lusitania by Winsor McCay, which is wild.
It is pretty wild for a couple of reasons. I mean, the usual kind of reason of Winsor McCay animation being very elaborate, like
Yeah.
crazy how I don't know, it is both. I feel like his animation is both kind of you can kind of see the seams of it a little bit more than like later animation. I'm thinking of the like 1940s and 50s, I guess.
Sure.
But at the same time, it's like I don't know, the scope of it is really impressive.
This is some of the most lavish animation I've ever seen.
Yeah. And I think it's like he hasn't figured out the usual shortcuts that they found out in animation later. It's like, oh, we can do this and like we can do like 4 frames and repeat them and it'll look fine. Whereas he's individually drawing every single frame. And so
Yeah.
the motion is like incredibly smooth, but it is also, you can really kind of see that they're like individual drawings, I guess, in a way. Like
Yeah.
you can kind of see the you can see behind the technique of it a little bit more, I think, than later animation.
Well, you say that, but apparently, something that I read is that Winsor McCay pioneered the idea of looping animation, and it's just that he didn't use it as much as other people would have.
Yeah.
He got some of his buddies to animate the water, I believe, in this, and the water was a looping animation. But still,
I mean, the fact that the water is animated to the degree that it is, either way, if it's looping or
Yeah.
not, it's still like, holy mackerel, this is really a lot.
So, like, true to the name, this is about the 1915 sinking of the Lusitania, which we talked about a few episodes ago. But the Germans torpedoed a civilian ship, and McKay was very mad about it. But William Randolph Hearst, who owned Winsor McCay, as far as
I own you.
I'm sure he said that at some
He
point.
probably did, is the thing.
For working at his newspapers, he wasn't. Hearst wasn't about joining World War I, and so he forced Winsor McCay to draw anti-war and anti-British cartoons, like editorial cartoons for the papers. But McCay was so like pro World War One. On his own time and with his own money, he made this movie by himself with a little assistance from some artist buds, and it took him 22 months to make this. And this was also, you're talking about these time-saving measures. He did adapt one of them, which is that this was his first movie to use cells, animation cells instead of like rice paper, so he was individually redoing every background for every shot in his earlier films.
Insanity.
This also has his like whole like framing device that he loves to do again.
Right. It is, I think, and it's another one of those things where we don't even think about how early this is, where it's like old cartoons feel they need to explain what animation is, lest the audience's mind be too blown. It's like, it's just drawings. Like, here's how we did it.
Don't freak out.
Yeah, like, up front, they're like, this is a bunch of drawings that we put together, and it looks like it's moving. Like, that's what you're seeing.
I can't tell if it's that or if it's, like, Winsor McCay trying to, like, hype himself up. You know?
I think it might be a bit of both, of being like, look how much work this was.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's also a part of it, but I find that very interesting, of just watching, like, the early animation that we've watched, and it's always sort of in some sort of framing device of like, here's a guy drawing all the drawings, and it's like,
right,
yeah, it's, you know, from a modern perspective, it's like, yeah, I know what animation is, but they didn't back then because it was a new thing. This, I was talking about in Soldier Arms, I feel like it functions as kind of World War I propaganda, but it also it doesn't feel overtly propagandistic, if that's a word, which I don't think it is.
No, it is.
Sure. Whereas Singing of Lusitania very much does. It is very propaganda-y, which is not a word.
That one's not, no.
It's really hitting you hard in the face with like, the Germans are terrible. Yeah. Look at what they've done.
Yeah, I mean, besides all the other stuff about this movie, it is like very propagandistic, including like a sort of ending title card.
That I wrote that down because it is wild.
Yeah. I mean, it shows you just all of this like suffering and horror through the whole short. And then it says, the man who fired the shot was decorated for it by the Kaiser, all caps. And yet they tell us not to hate the Hun.
Also, just like, there's something so kind of, I guess, archaic about the word the Hun. It really kind of couches this in like the time period.
Also, every time I see it, I have to like think like, is this racist? I'm not sure, you know.
I mean, I think it was back then. I think it's almost so archaic now that it is like, it's like, wait, what? Like, what are you even talking about? There's a lot of things in these old silent movies I'm like, I know this is a little racist, but I don't know exactly how racist it is.
Remember when we were kind of shocked by how unracist stuff was in the beginning, and that's starting to not be the case so much anymore?
Yeah, it's they started to really kind of let their flag fly a little bit more, I think.
Thanks, DW.
These old-timey filmmakers. Yeah. That, honestly, that probably did not help. It for sure did not. But yeah, very good animation, very heavy propaganda from the time period, but worth watching either way. Like,
I think so, especially, I mean, I've actually seen this one before in an animation class that I took, and seeing it again just as a work of animation is kind of amazing. There are camera angles that I don't know.
There's like moving objects where it's like things that I know are very difficult to do in animation, of like cameras moving around objects, moving cameras. It's like a lot of that is in here.
Yeah. It's very showy. Like they're like really. It's also like pretty horrific too. You're seeing like death and like people falling off the boat into the water and people drowning. It's pretty rough.
Yeah, it is very much designed to make you upset and to like get an emotional reaction out of the audience, I think. A much less emotional movie The Ghost of Slumber Mountain.
A much less emotional movie, but a no less important animation wise.
Yes.
No less interesting animation wise.
That is a much better segue. Yeah, The Ghost of Slumber Mountain, which is directed by Willis O'Brien, who is best known for doing the stop motion animation of King Kong. And we covered one of his earlier stop motion shorts already, involving prehistoric creatures and such. This one, though, is combined with live action in interesting ways, which I don't believe had been done to this degree, at the very least. Mm-hmm. This was originally 40 minutes long, only about 15 are watchable.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. I didn't know that there was so much lost.
Right, it doesn't feel that incomplete is the thing. It feels like a complete film. Like, you watch it and you're like, oh yeah, it doesn't feel like there's any egregious things missing out of it. But apparently there was a lot of additional footage that has been was cut out earlier or has been lost or through various things.
Oh wow, yeah.
It's definitely a step up from Willis's first film from 1915. This was commissioned and produced by Herbert M. Dawley, who ended up taking most of the credit for it and the money. Both of them appear in the film as actors. Dawley as the lead, an explorer named Jack Holmes, which is a good explorer name. And O'Brien plays Mad Dick, the titular ghost. Which is one of the... It's like, don't giggle. Like, it's the olden times. They had different slang words. It's short for Richard, okay?
But here's the thing, and I'm just going to pause to say that one of the things that jumped out at me the most about this movie is how gay it is.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
and it's one of those things where I'm like, I can't tell if this is intentional or not.
I can't tell either, but, like, I'm just wondering, like, are we trying to be told something here, you know?
Right. And, well, apparently that was... Even at the time, there was a sort of, I don't know, according to the author Christopher Workman, some of the cuts down from the original 40 minutes may have been done to avoid any homoeroticism, and that's based entirely off one of the remaining scenes. Yeah, I can't tell if it's like Willis O'Brien is like, hey, trying to put some something for the fellas here. And Dolly was like, no, none of that. Which is kind of the impression that I get from this sort of like, I guess the contemporary sort of writings about this movie. But
yeah, I mean, I'll say that he quote he thought of Mad Dick as he fell asleep by the fire, and there is a scene where the main character and the kind of secondary explorer, he's trying to paint the scene that they get to, and he quote tried to get Joe to remove his clothes and pose as a fawn, and he's like, and his excuse for not taking his clothes off was that the skeeters are too thick.
Yeah. Which again is like, is this just old timiness where they just weren't as like aware, or sort of, it's almost the sort of thing where it's like in a modern context there's enough like weird homophobia around something like that it's like no, we can't have that, people will think it's too gay. Whereas I don't know if in 1918 if that was even a concern, but
I don't know,
maybe it was.
Yeah. I'd like to think that it's a gay dinosaur movie.
I always want to assume that it's intentional in every instance.
Yeah.
Because that just makes it more interesting and a better piece of filmmaking, I think. Oh, in pretty much every example that we've come across. But yeah, this movie's got dinosaurs in it. It's about the explorer goes out into up to Slumber Mountain to find a ghost. And the ghost kind of reveals ways to look into the past to see the dinosaurs, but the dinosaurs start kind of bleeding through to the present and chasing and eat Jack Holmes, and it's there's a T-Rex in this movie.
Yeah.
The Barnum Brown, who is credited with finding the first fossils of Tyrannosaurus Rex, was a consultant on the film, which I thought was very interesting. That
Huh.
already, like, one of the earliest dinosaur movies, they were like, we need a real dinosaur guy to come in and, like, explain what's what, you know?
Yeah, Mr. DNA.
It is, similarly to Soldier Arms, ends with "it was all a dream," which is such a... I'm not a fan of the it was all a dream
It's
plot
a bad.
device.
Yeah,
It's
It's
bad.
bad.
It's almost never done well. But this movie does have stop motion dinosaurs in it, which is super cool.
Yeah.
So
I think
check
that
it out.
I think that like one of my the animation's all quite good, but I really liked that there was in particular one of the Triceratops that had like a breathing belly. Like
Yeah.
at every point where it was moving, it was doing sort of a naturalistic breathing, and it really like lent a lot of life to it that something that it otherwise wouldn't have had.
That's where Spielberg got the idea for the Triceratops breathing in Jurassic Park.
He'd never heard of breathing before.
Yeah, no. Dinosaurs never breathed before this movie.
All right.
And now we got one last short to talk about. Speaking of of intentional homoeroticism or not.
Yeah, seriously. Good segue. I love when we can do a good segue. It's
Yeah.
always very satisfying.
It is indeed.
It's called I Don't Want to Be a Man, which from the title, you can tell that something gay is happening.
My first note on this is very funny, very gay. Which it is. It is. I think this is, of all the movies that we've watched, this is probably the most explicitly gay movie. Where it's
Yeah.
like, it is part of the plot, kind of. It's not like, oh yeah, two ladies dancing and like maybe giving a little smooch.
Right.
This is like, no. This is, well, it's weird. Because it almost fully commits to it, and then I feel like kind of at the last minute kind of falls back on being very heteronormative at the very end.
Unless they're both bi.
True, but I think it's interesting that it's like it's pushing up against what I assume were the kind of social norms.
Yeah.
I mean, this was a German film, right?
Yeah.
My understanding of Germany during this time period comes mostly from the Netflix show Babylon Berlin, which is set in the 20s. So I don't really know how like social norms differed in Germany versus the US.
Well, from what I've heard, and I don't know certainly, but Germany was one of the more free places as far as queerness went, up until the Nazis kind of put an end to all of it.
That's definitely the impression that I got from watching the Netflix show. How most people learn history now is watching Netflix shows.
Yeah.
I mean, right off the bat, I feel like this doesn't feel like the American comedies that we've been watching. I think both in terms of the style and the subject matter.
It is very funny.
Yeah.
But it's not slapstick, really.
Yeah, it's more like sitcom, like funny situations,
Yes,
and like
hijinks.
how are they gonna get out of this? So we meet a young woman, Ossie, I guess is how you pronounce her name. I don't know what the correct German pronunciation is.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say Ossie. Ossie Aswalda, who is a young woman who likes to drink and cuss and gamble. And her uncle and governess don't like that she is not very ladylike. So
Yeah.
they hire a tutor, I guess, guardian,
They call it a guardian. Yeah.
whatever sort of weird social construct that was in Germany at the time, to teach her proper manners. And there was immediate like sexual tension with this tutor coming in and like being very strict and telling her what she can't do, and it's like a weird like dom sub thing from the get-go, where it's like this is already weirdly sexual.
That's funny.
Not explicitly, but there's
It's
just
an
there's
energy. It's a
there's a
vibe.
weird energy right from the beginning. Exactly.
I think like one of my biggest laughs from the movie, which she's already kind of established as this sort of spunky, rebellious kid, and then like this kind of stuffed up guy comes to be her guardian, and then she just like points at him, and she's just like, "Oh, so you're the one who's in for a rude awakening," you know? and and I thought that she like had like such a good look on her face when she did it. Like it was a really good like comedic acting, I thought.
Yeah, there's a lot of very good silent movie acting in ways that are not sort of like the wild, like, whoa, throwing plates up in the air. Like,
Yeah,
there's like good little character moments like that.
Mm-hmm.
So Aussie decides that she doesn't want to be told what to do and that societal rules for women are bullshit, and goes and buys a tuxedo in a tailor shop full of horny dudes. And there's a lot of this is like the slapstickiest scene in the whole movie of like,
right.
There's all the guys like turning and looking at her and still continuing to work, but they're all messing up what they're trying to do. So they're all like throwing pants to each other and missing, and like the pants are landing on each other's heads, and they're, you know.
And they're all like kind of clamoring to be the one to get her measurements, and they split it up and they say like, "Oh, I'll get her arm, I'll get her other arm," you know. I thought a sort of key line as far as the queerness of this too is that when she's feeling restricted by all of the stuff that is being put on her as a woman, right before she decides to make this choice to dress up as a man, she says, "Why didn't I come into this world as a boy?"
Yeah.
So something to chew on there. Definitely.
Yeah. There's a lot of that in this movie of
Yeah.
that kind of like masculine and feminine definition,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of the societal like things put on both of those.
It's a movie that is about the restrictions of patriarchy on men and women.
Yeah. And so she dresses up in a tuxedo, and she's like going out in as a man about town. And it's like immediately chastised for not being manly enough. And there's like, she's on the tram or the streetcar or whatever. And it's like, they're like, "Oh, like you're supposed to sit up for a lady, you're supposed to give a lady your seat. Like, what are you doing?" And there's like, she's like, "Oh, I have to like be chivalrous now. God damn it." But so she goes to the club, and there's this sort of thing where it's like, oh yeah, the ladies just sort of like give their coat to the men, and the men all like go to the coat check with all the ladies' coats. And so suddenly she's like having to like wait at the coat check with all the other dudes. And she's like, "God, I want to just go in. Like, I have to like wait in line now. What is this?"
It walks this movie like at this point in the movie, I was realizing that the "I don't want to be a man" is kind of referring to, because it's this series of her going like, "Wow, men have it tough," actually,
Yeah.
which it is a fine line to walk.
It is.
Because what they're doing is that they are pointing out actual inequities in society, and ways that are that men are told to be from a perspective of patriarchy that are restrictive on men, and those are the things that she is feeling. But the overall thing that is sometimes coming across is that men have it rough, which is not necessarily the case.
I think that's definitely, there are sections of the movie that are kind of getting at that, just to kind of even it out, I guess. But I think that the overall,
it's a source of comedy too.
I mean, the overall thing that I got from the movie is just like, gender's a construct and it's dumb. It's like, that seems like the main point that this movie is kind of trying to make.
From 100 years ago,
Yeah. She runs into the guardian, her guardian at the club, who doesn't recognize her and thinks she's another man in a tuxedo, and they both get super drunk and start making out. And then
that's true.
They switch coats and end up in each other's houses and have to like sneak back to each other's houses because they're like, "Oh, what happened?" And so then like as they're kind of trying to like sneak back into each other's house, they like see each other again, and the ruse is revealed. And then they just kind of continue making out and having like a weird power dynamic kink thing happening. But it does sort of, it comes back, it like starts with them both in their corners of like, there's a man, he's got all his masculine shit going on. There's a woman, she's got all her feminine shit going on. They kind of meet in the middle of like abandoning all of that. And then they kind of, in the end, kind of return to their corners a bit.
Right, because I mean, in the end, she takes the drag off, and they kind of fully understand what their dynamic is once he sees her kind of half in drag and half not in drag, and then he realizes that it was her that he was hanging out with the whole night, and that they can just get together in a societally acceptable heterosexual way. I thought it was interesting also that the way, they get drunk and they start making out, but like they get drunk because she starts kind of messing with him because she kind of like resents him for being the one who's going to get her in line as a ladylike person. So she starts like messing with his date or whatever, and then
he's like flirting. He's flirting with a woman, right? And then she's like trying to steal the woman away.
Exactly. While she's in drag, so her the guy comes over and then tries to like start a fight or something like that, and then while he does, the lady that he's coming on to like is already kissing another guy, and then the Aussie and the Guardian, they look at each other and they go, "Oh, women," and then and then they bond in a masculine way by smoking cigars and drinking lots of champagne, and so they get so insanely drunk, and their bonding is so masculine that they just have to make out. Is what happens.
That's what you have to do, I guess. That's all the shorts that we watched. Time now for our feature presentation.
And now we're pleased to bring you our feature presentation.
Thank you for that music.
Are you thanking yourself? Oh,
yes.
Okay. No. All right. The music.
So we watched a couple of features because they're still somewhat short.
They're not like Intolerance length.
Right. D.W. Griffith, speaking of intolerance, did release a movie this year called Hearts of the World, which is a World War I sort of big budget war propaganda movie. There's no good release of it anywhere online, including like Paramount Plus and things like that. So I watched the first like 15 minutes, which is the prologue, and that was enough for me. Thank you very much, because this movie has a little prologue, which it apologizes for more than once. It opens with a title card saying, "We beg your indulgence for this short prologue. It has no possible interest, save to vouch for the rather unusual event of an American producer being allowed to take pictures of an actual battlefield." Cut to D.W. Griffith in a trench with a camera. Cut back to title cards, apologies, and thanks. The picture follows. It's almost like, this is my take, it's almost like D.W. Griffith forced someone to add in a prologue to show how cool he was for going to a trench to get actual footage of the war. And he's like, "No, you have to put this in at the beginning." And they're like, "He made us do it. We're sorry. Just watch it, so we'll shut up." Like, it's short. Don't worry about it. Like, it'll be over very quick. It's so apologetic in the title cards. It says apologies and thanks. The picture, it's like, please just like watch this so that he'll shut up about it. That's all I want. After that, I was like, well, after that, I'm out. Also, terrible video quality, but
And we don't need any more D.W. Griffith.
no, it's like we know his whole deal at this point. Unless he comes out with another movie that is like very, important in quotes. We did watch some other films. Which one would you like to discuss first?
Why don't we start with The Outlaw and His Wife, another film from Victor Sjöström. Victor Sjöström. This is another one of his family man goes to jail with a good heart, goes to jail. He is struck with tragedy and then turns gray and becomes a shell of themselves movies.
Correct. Yeah. very similar to the last one. I mean, this is based, I guess, loosely on a true story from 19th century Iceland, and it's another kind of folk tale-y kind of story where he's taking an existing thing and dramatizing it. Weird that I did not pick up on all of those similarities, though. It is, very, very similar in a lot of ways to his last movie. Or the last movie that we watched, I should say. There is a vagabond right off the bat. Victor Sjostrom plays a wandering stranger who comes to town.
And he introduces himself as Kari. We find out later that his name is Eyvind, which is the name of the actual person that it was based on.
Yeah.
And he is a runaway thief from the south. And initially when he comes to town, everyone... kind of trusts him and sees him as a hard-working guy, and they send him to a woman named Hatla to work for her. But somebody recognizes him from the south of Iceland as a thief.
It is kind of crazy, I think, in this movie, is that it shows that he stole a sheep to feed his starving family.
Yes.
That's his big crime, which is a very sort of Les Miserables-esque, the most well-intentioned crime possible.
Yeah.
You know?
He stole the sheep from an asshole priest, too.
Yes. Who's got tons of sheep.
Yes.
And he went and asked for, please, my family's starving, can I have a sheep? And he's like, no. And so, it's sort of, he's thrown in jail. And what's wild, though, is that, so, I mean, we're kind of skipping to, the second half of the movie here, once it's, he's found out and he has to go on the run. He's living up in the, him and Hatla are living up in the mountains. But they send a posse after him. They're, bloodlust, trying to murder him. He's a thief.
Yeah.
We have to hang him or whatever. And it's he stole a sheep. What? They're acting like he's a serial killer. And they hate him so much for this crime of stealing a sheep that they're willing to risk their own lives and also try to murder him and Hatla over the fact that he is an escaped thief.
They do love sheep in Iceland, but, I mean, considering that when I was there, they just kind of roamed all over the place and walked through the road. I don't know, how much a random sheep going missing is a big deal.
One fun detail of his escaping from jail, though, is that he escapes by pulling the bars off his window, just with his hands.
Yeah.
Because he's a strong, handsome boy.
I like how it doesn't remark on that Superman-esque feat.
No, it does mention more than once that he's he's a strong lad. They do kind of talk him up as he's a strapping fella, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So that's part of it, is that he's works on a farm, he's strong, he can pull the bars off a window.
Off a jail cell.
I guess the bar for being an outlaw in 19th century Iceland was just a lot lower back then. There weren't enough crimes, so it's you stole a sheep and suddenly you're public enemy number one.
Yeah, I mean, I can mention that I went to the Icelandic Museum of Witchcraft and Sorcery, and it was Iceland is the place where the most male witches were burned. They were serious about their punitiveness, you know. They were burning witches kind of not just in a bout in the 1600s. They were burning them consistently for centuries.
Yikes.
He wasn't a witch, but you know, he was a ne'er-do-well according to the Icelandic authorities.
I mean, he stole a sheep. So we run off to the hills. There is a fair amount of things that happen kind of in the village before this, but it's, it's they gets in a fight with the sheriff, and there's he wants to marry Hatla, but she refuses. But then they run off into the hills as outlaws. 5 years pass of them living up in the mountains.
Yes.
And we sort of come back to them with a child.
They're living off the land. They're happy.
it says, there was a great desert in their souls, which I'm like, same.
Guess they're not that happy then.
Yeah, we see Chekhov's cliff, which is like there's a massive cliff right next to the house that they live on. I'm like, oof, that cliff though. Someone's going over that.
It turns out it's the worst possible answer to who goes over that cliff.
Which I also kind of assumed. A friend of theirs shows up, and is staying with them, but kind of starts lusting after Hadla, kind of looking down her shirt and shit like that, just being a real creep.
It's weird to have like a point of view cleavage shot in a movie like this, you know?
Yeah, but then the sheriff finds them, and a weird thing happens at this moment. So that like a posse shows up to presumably murder them, and Hadla, to, I guess, protect her child from the mob, throws them over the cliff. Which I don't really understand the logic behind. Of like, oh, you're gonna kill my kid, huh? Not if I do it first. And Ivan kills Bjorn and the sheriff in the ensuing fight. And so now they're childless and have even more of a desert in their souls, presumably. And we kind of time jump again to them being old and gray and living in a little hut during a snowstorm and kind of bickering. They're now very bitter and childless.
Particularly bitter, maybe ambiently bitter because of the fact that they committed babyside. But like particularly bitter because you cut to them having been stuck inside, fugitives from society, and have been 7 days without any food in the snowstorm.
Yeah, that'll do it, for sure. Also, there is some really very effective, I think, but simple use of editing when we cut back to them in this section to when they were like young and happy, and we see them without all the old age makeup, and it's like just the contrast of that is so immediately kind of arresting and like, oh boy, the ravages of time, all that stuff, where it's like just that very simple sort of like cut back to earlier in the movie, just to kind of show the progression is really good.
His Sjöström's movies really seem to have like a life scale scope to them.
Yeah, they are very much about a life.
Yeah.
As opposed to just like a week or a night, or like, the time frame a lot of these other movies is very short comparatively.
Which, I mean, it's not Sjöström's movie, but I believe it was the last movie that he was ever in as an actor was Wild Strawberries, which kind of gets at similar themes of like a long-lived life.
Yeah, age, the ravages of time, all that stuff.
These people get ravaged by a snowstorm because they, after arguing and realizing that they're on the brink of death, Hadla suggests that they go out into the snow to die together because there's no way that they're going to survive. And Eyvind does not, like, kind of says no. He doesn't, he wants to keep trying. She has kind of made her decision, and so when he goes out to get some firewood, she steps outside and then kind of lays down in a snowbank and starts to die. She sees a vision of the dead child, and then Eyvind sees that she's missing, runs after her, and then dies with her. And there's a title card that says "Death forgave them."
Yeah, there's another title card that says "Love was their only law," which is a nice bit of a very poetic way to end the movie.
Love was their only law really sounds like a tagline to Bonnie and Clyde.
It sounds like the tagline to a kind of like slightly trashy like chase movie. Yeah. One of the last shots of the movie is a shot of their frozen corpses facing each other, and it made me say "holy shit" out loud. I was like, damn, this is it's like, holy shit, this is a very dark bummer ending.
Yeah.
Which I did not fully expect from this movie. This really goes hard in the last like third of it.
It's a real tragedy. I mean, I think this movie was quite well put together.
Yeah.
I think that Sjöström's like a pretty good filmmaker from what I've seen so far. it told this story very well. A lot of like twists and turns, and you kind of felt like you were there with them.
Yeah, I a couple of just like filmmaking things that stuck out to me is the editing. I think there was some really effective use of editing here, especially with like the nonlinear stuff at the end of like showing at the beginning again is always kind of an effective tool. And then also just like I think there was a lot of this in A Man There Was also of like just good uses of close-ups and like when to punch into like just a good kind of portrait shot, which I think are well shot in a way that I think a lot of other, I don't know, just the use of kind of light and framing and things like that in this just feel very
dramatic light.
Dramatic, just a bit more expressionistic than a lot of the American movies that we've been watching.
Yeah, and I think as an actor too, in those close-ups, he's really good at anguish. Sjostrom.
I mean, that's his main thing in both of these two movies that we've watched of his.
Yeah,
a lot of anguish, and so yeah, he gets that across very well. It's true, without like, it is definitely silent movie acting, but it is, I think, very good silent movie acting.
What do you want to start with, and what do you want to end on here?
Well, we could stay in the Scandinavian region and talk about the Danish space opera Himmelskibet.
We got to go with those segues whenever possible. Himmelskibet,
or a trip to Mars is the English title, but I like Himmelskibet.
I do too, which shares the name of a ride at like it shares the name of a ride at an amusement park in Copenhagen. I believe it means like rocket ship, basically. Himmelskibet, we were like nearly done with like picking what movies we watched, and then I saw this movie. I saw like what the outfits of these characters were wearing, and I said, Glenn, we need to watch this movie. You need to watch this movie, Glenn. True. You have a poster of the Rocketeer behind you right now. He's pointing it to it if you're listening to the podcast.
Yeah, some good sort of like retro futuristic fashion in this movie for sure. I mean, this is like a pretty proper space opera in ways that I think are more in line with what I think of that genre being than like A Trip to the Moon.
For sure. There are some like kind of interesting, I mean, I don't know if this movie was meant to have any kind of reference to Trip to the Moon in the original language, because it was just called Himmelskibet and not A Trip to Mars, which it shares the title with a kind of crappy Edison movie from like 8 years before. But it does have some kind of reminiscences of A Trip to the Moon, particularly in the fact that all of the people have very silly names, like Professor Dubious and Corona Planetaros.
I had to, we got to talk about Professor Dubious. I have it written down. Always trust a guy named Professor Dubious. Very trustworthy sounding fella, which he turns out to, be exactly what he sounds like. I do love names like this in silent movies where they're just like, I don't know, this guy's the villain. What's his name? I don't know, Professor Dubious. Like, there's sort of a cartoon logic to them that I really enjoy.
No, I like that too. The basic arc of this is that there's a young, like a kind of flyboy son of a scientist who has decided that he wants to build a spaceship and go to Mars. He spends 2 years building a ship and gathers a team, a ragtag team, and they say goodbye to Earth and launch off to Mars. They spend 6 months in space and are almost driven to mutiny.
Drunken space mutiny.
Yes. They land on Mars. They discover that the Martians are hippies who are extremely advanced, and in another kind of reminiscence, or almost like a deconstruction of the kind of semi-colonialist, maybe satirical, maybe not, trip to the moon. They come back and like bring peace to Earth in a way.
Yeah, it is very much not a sort of tale of conquering the planets. It is like there are civilizations beyond our own that exist in the stars that are like better, and we should learn from them.
I mean, yeah, like speaking of, the Shustrom movie, being such a kind of cynical movie, this is a really optimistic movie. I like this a lot.
It is, honestly, it is so optimistic that my modern cynical brain was like, when is the dark twist gonna come?
Same.
So after, the space mutiny, they land on Mars, and they find, this sort of like very kind of hippie-esque, like the Martians have discovered the universal language that everyone can speak and understand.
Yeah.
Just naturally. And it's like, oh, there used to be, wars and stuff on Mars, and they've figured it all out. They've solved, world peace, as it were, on their planet. There's this kind of thing where it's like, oh yeah, they land on a planet and they find this like seemingly utopian society where it's just like, oh, everything's great here. Like everything's fine. Everything works out. Like here's all these beautiful things and like amazing technology and things like that. And I was like, when are they going to find the bodies,
Yeah,
It's
you're
like,
waiting for like a seedy underbelly
you're
or
waiting for
something.
them to be like, oh, just implant this slug in your brain,
Yeah.
And it's like, it's like he is injured. Let's eat him. It's I kept waiting for that to happen because that's every episode of Star Trek is that. Every like 50s sci-fi movie is that, and it just never happens. It's just it is exactly what it says on the tin.
Which I thought it was great. I really liked that. Like I was expecting a seedy underbelly. I was expecting bodies. I was expecting a Midsummer-esque kind of.
Well, you brought up Midsummer. I had so many Midsummer flashbacks during this because the closest thing it gets to a dark, seedy underbelly is kind of a weird ritual sacrifice thing happening, which is
I don't
very
know.
Midsummer.
I think that you can interpret it in a nice way.
That was definitely, I think, me projecting because I was already being like, this is a Scandinavian. This is like, it's shot in Denmark, I assume. So it has this sort of like Northern European landscape, and it's all sunny, and everyone's in like flowing clothes, and I'm just like,
yeah.
When are they gonna find the bodies?
These aliens are literally like these Martians. They're literally walking around with flowers in their hair, flowy white dresses. They talk about peace and love. They're vegetarians.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of wild. Like not just how much they saw about the future, science fiction. They saw about the future like 40 years later. They like could depict what hippies were before they existed. You know?
I mean, I'm sure that there were other like social movements before then that were like, hey, be one with nature and like chill out.
Yeah.
There's a repeated line in this movie, which is "Love is the force you call God," which I do actually think is a very lovely sentiment.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was in a song that the aliens sang to the humans as they like left the planet and went back home.
Mm-hmm.
The song like had some good messages in it, definitely. Like I wrote it down. Return with a stronger faith. You're connected to the planet. Space is the mother of life, embracing all our globes. That's kind of a nice sentiment. Love is the force you call God. Bring back the message that we're all the same. Understand that we're all steps on the same ladder that leads to eternity. Love is the force that you call God. Our seeds you will sow on earth, ridding you of your lowly speech. Flawlessness you shall reach through the force of love. Love is the force you call God. And this is as they're walking into a ship that's covered like a brass spaceship that's covered in flowers.
Yeah. There is the aforementioned kind of weird ritual suicide thing happening that is not explicitly that, but kind of has vibes of it. That is the closest thing to a sort of dark underbelly to this movie. And it's mostly me projecting onto it.
Projecting Midsummer, yeah.
Yeah.
Why don't you? Here's the thing, though, right? Is that so? The main guy, he falls in love with an alien.
Naturally.
He sleeps under the tree of longing, and then she tells him that if he feels the longing in his dream, then the two of them were meant to be. And he has a dream that means that they get together. So he kind of like asks her dad, who's like the leader of the Martians, for his permission. He's like, yeah, great.
Utopian society still hadn't figured out that thing.
Yeah. And he like when he comes up to ask him, her dad's like lying on a bench in the woods, looking kind of like nearly dead. And then he goes like, that's great, you guys. I'm also having a good time because I'm about to make the journey into death. He says, I feel that my life is fulfilled and I'm ready for the happiness of death. And then they do a whole party to celebrate his life, and then he sails away on a boat to the Undying Lands, and Arwen gets to stay with Aragorn. It's the Undying Lands. It's not Midsummer, right. Face smashing.
I was already so reminded of Midsummer at that point that I was just like, oh my god. Back on Earth, things are not so lovey-dovey. Professor Dubious is being a real asshole. So Professor Dubious shows up at the beginning. There's all this talk about, we're going to Mars, we're building a rocket, blah, 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 blah. And then there's this guy named Dubious who's like, no, you won't. It's not going to work. Nah. And then back on Earth, we see Professor Planeteros, the father of the kind of lead astronaut who went and fell in love with the Martian woman, has grown weak from stress. He doesn't know if they made it or not. He's sort of like, they went off, they left, we don't know what happened. And so Dubious shows up just to kind of gloat at him. Then, news reaches them that the ship called the Excelsior is on its way back, and Dubious is like, oh, I always believed that they would do it. And they're like, no, you didn't. Fuck off. He does, and then is promptly struck by lightning while shaking his fist at the ship as it lands.
He's definitely a mustache twirler.
I do think that's funny, though, that it's like this movie is so sort of like, like peace and togetherness and love, and it's like, this is what we need to embrace. And it's like, and then there's this one asshole that no one likes, and he gets struck by lightning and dies.
Yeah. It does seem to undermine its point a little bit. And the movie really is making a point about, like, it's the classic sci-fi thing to, like, comment on what Earth is and everything like that. But, like, the movie is very pointed in going, like, these aliens are doing it better than us, and we need to learn from them. Like, they're horrified at the idea that we harm and kill each other and that we eat meat. And even when there's like the humans like almost murder an alien and they kill a bird that
they
horrifies.
They shoot a bird and then they throw a grenade at a guy.
Yeah,
which makes me wonder, why did they bring grenades?
They could be hostile aliens. They don't know.
True. I guess you never know. Could be an ape planet.
But that like these trigger happy Danes are have done something so horrible. It's been thousands of years since a shot has been fired on Mars, and everyone is so horrified and like, but instead of punishing them or forcing them to go away, they take them to a place to be judged, right? And they think, oh no, someone's going to sentence us
again.
To death.
I was like, oh my god, what is it going to be? And then it's just like, no, it's just like, think about it, think about what you did.
They're like, no, like you no, you shall judge yourself. Only through self-knowledge can you atone for your sin. And so they just like think about it for a while and they go like, man, we're really sorry,
They just very sheepishly come out of the tribunal being like, sorry guys.
Yeah. So they throw their guns on the ground. They renounce killing of all creatures and their weapons. And the Martian that was grenaded, just from the good vibes, comes back to life. um, and then they're dressed in the robes of innocence from then on. But like key to this, to my point from earlier, is that the astronauts are kind of astonished at this system of justice, and they think back to the way that criminals are treated on Earth, and they think like how monstrous of us to lock people up in jail. You know, this is like an anti-carceral movie. It's awesome.
Yeah. I do think, while I do like the points this movie is making, I think it is incredibly blunt.
Yeah.
It doesn't really weave this stuff into the story so much as it just kind of has characters show up and say them. I mean, that's, if I have a criticism of this movie, it's definitely that it doesn't really have a lot of dramatic tension in it, other than like, what's gonna happen? And it's like, nothing bad, everything's kind of fine. Which is, I mean, certainly it is interesting to see, just because it's like that's not normally how stories go, and so it's like, oh, this is unexpected, you know. It lays it on pretty thick.
I guess. I don't know. I don't mind things being blunt, and I was refreshed at the optimism, and I thought that it was actually dealing with like some more complex ideas than most stuff that I've like seen so far.
Yeah, for sure. It is definitely a movie with kind of like philosophical ideas on its mind, which isn't a lot of what we've watched. I guess. Or at least not to this degree, where it is also like very forward thinking. I think not only in its kind of philosophy and its sort of like morals, but also just in that it's a lot of the design and a lot of the kind of plot mechanics of it remind me a lot of like classic Star Trek. I don't know if Gene Roddenberry ever saw this movie, but it feels like a very much a sort of like proto precursor to the kind of like idealistic sort of utopian ideas of Star Trek.
Yeah. The effects also were quite good, and they reminded me of like old Méliès effects and how we don't really see that much stuff anymore. Like they had mats that made it look like they were looking out over the sky like thousands of feet in the air while they were flying over it. They had superimpositions of the ship flying through the clouds, and they had like a miniature Earth and globe in space, and the thing moving through space. Like it looked like space effects from many years later.
I think I was also surprised at how the degree to which kind of how much more scientifically accurate this movie is towards like space travel than A Trip to the Moon, where it's like, we shot a big cannon at the moon, and a bunch of guys in suits came out and like fought moon men. Whereas this is like, no, it takes a really long time. You have to get in like a pressurized thing, and you're going to be in there for a very long time, and you can't leave, and it's like the food isn't good.
And they were like calculating when Mars is going to be closest to
Earth.
Right,
that too. The sort of like, there's all this talk in the beginning of like planetary orbits and things like that, where I was like, oh, this is like pretty, they get it. They know
it's like hard sci-fi for the time.
Yeah. I guess we haven't really watched a lot of like effects driven movies in a while.
Yeah.
Whereas this is very much, I'm sure we got many more to come. Speaking of effects driven movies, the next one isn't one, but it is the highest grossing film of 1918.
Yes. And also retained the #1 most ticket sales of any movie up until 1937.
Wow.
This shares the spot of #1 ticket sales with only 4 other movies. Gone with the Wind, Snow White, which took the crown from it, the 10 Commandments, and Sound of Music. And Mickey, this movie.
Wow.
Which are the only movies that have had the most ticket sales of any movie ever.
Damn, yeah. Truly, this was the Spider-Man No Way Home of 1918.
Maybe it'll be dethroned.
I doubt. I mean, it is wild how much, going by ticket sales, like how much bigger movies were, because they also played for so much longer, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, this was also kind of a late edition where we're like, we should probably talk about one of the biggest like blockbusters before blockbusters were a thing, kind of like Mickey, directed by F. Richard Jones and James Young, and starring Mabel Normand, and it is very much a Mabel Normand vehicle. It is the only film produced under the Mabel Normand Feature Film Company, which was her like label. She was like, I'm making movies for me, and she got one, and it was like the biggest movie of the year. But I think it sat on a shelf for over a year. I think she shot it in like 1916 or 1917. I guess it's a rom-com, a screwball comedy of sorts.
Yeah, I mean, well, it sat on the shelf for so long because they didn't know what to do with it. Because this movie's like a lot of different things.
Right. Yeah.
It's got dark elements. It's got sad elements. It's got romance, comedy. You know, but yeah, at its root, it is a kind of fish out of water story. A Fresh Prince kind of scenario where she goes into town and makes some trouble with a dog, and she's sent off to her aunt in Long Island, her rich aunt in Long Island.
Yeah.
You know.
Oh yeah, it starts in like a mining town in California. I immediately thought, oh, Blake Snyder would love this movie because she saves a cat right at the beginning of the movie. We'll save the cat reference for all the screenwriting students out there.
Not me.
Blake Snyder wrote a book called Save the Cat, where he's like, every movie should start with a character doing something good, like saving a cat, so then the audience will like them. And it's kind of I don't know. I only know about it because I feel like a lot of screenwriters now are like, that's dumb.
This is the kind of stuff you guys talk about in your guild.
I am not in the guild. I just listen to script notes a lot.
I was thrown for a loop twice within the first minute of this movie because the mine that they work at is called Tomboy Mine, which must have meant something else. And
it's a boy named Tom. What are you talking
about? And then there are two characters named Mickey, the main character, and then her like adoptive mom, who is Minnie, Mickey and Minnie in the same movie. What?
Oh, mayhaps. Mr. Disney took a few things from this film. I don't know. That's a conspiracy theory to throw out there.
I mean, in a way, I wouldn't be surprised. Like, this movie was huge, right? And like,
I'm sure he knew about it.
Though they don't have a ton of scenes together, like maybe he just liked the way the two names sounded together, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. You heard it here first, folks.
Scoops.
There's a lot of machinations in this movie involving like mine ownership, which I didn't entirely follow. There is also, I mean, it's pretty fast paced. There's a lot of stunts and sort of like fights and car chases and things too. Mm-hmm. Falling off roofs, driving cars in front of trains.
Yeah, it's like action set pieces in this too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a pretty. It is like you said. Like there's a lot going on, but it has a kind of. It makes sense that this movie made such an impact, I guess, or like made so much money that it does kind of feel like one of those like 4-quadrant. You know, it's like it's got something for everybody. You know, it's got a romance, it's got some comedy, it's got action. You know, it's got sad parts. It's got it all. Mm-hmm. Another thing that I just thought of. It is like Spider-Man because it was a big blockbuster movie that came out during a pandemic. So there you go.
Oh yeah, true. Yeah. It's also like Iron Giant in that a squirrel runs up someone's pants.
Exactly. Yeah. I was about to say that. One thing that struck me about it is the editing is kind of weird. There's a lot of shots that look like they're about to do something cool and then it will cut away. There's a lot of things where like it looks like they're gonna do an iris in and then a cut away before it finishes and I'm like, what? Just let it finish, you know? Or like there'll be the camera will start to move in a cool way and they'll cut away very quickly. So I'm wondering if this movie was at one point recut, or if it was just the editor didn't really know what they were doing as much. The other thing that struck me about it, I guess, is just that Mabel Normand, very good at her job.
Yeah. I think she's very charming in this movie.
Yeah. I feel like she's another kind of silent comedy star that I had like a little bit of like a vague awareness of, but once we started doing this, I wanted to watch more of her movies because she was like one of the biggest, early movie stars, especially in comedy, and I feel like gets forgotten about very, very easily.
She was the original Melissa McCarthy.
Sure, yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. Just a comedy lady.
Yeah. Something that I remember we saw, I think it was in The Ocean Waif, is there's a scene in this of a man sort of charmingly threatening a woman with a gun, which is like a silent comedy gag that I'm like, what? Whose idea was this? I don't know if I have a lot else to say about it. It's fun. It's charming. Mabel Normand is very funny, and I feel like it has a good sense of kind of naturalism also. Like that is always something that I think sticks out to me in silent movies, is when people give really sort of naturalistic performances, because it's not what we think of when we think of silent movies, especially comedies. We think of very big, broad, sort of pantomime-y things, which there was a lot of in these movies, but it's always nice to see that it isn't just that. They're not on one wavelength the whole time.
Yeah. I liked it okay. I thought, like most movies that are extremely popular, I feel like it's got like broad appeal, I guess I'll say.
Yeah.
But yes, it's a fun story. There's some good gags got out of her kind of schisms between her and her rich cousins.
Right.
And then it has a happy ending where she becomes a millionaire.
Yeah.
But you'll have to watch to find out how that happens. The answer is mine ownership machinations.
Yeah, weird mine ownership stuff. This is also another movie from 1918 about a young woman who gets yelled at for not being ladylike enough. So that was something in the zeitgeist for sure.
That could have been our segue if we tied this together.
Probably would have been a better one than whatever one that we used. But you know what? Live and learn.
Well, I guess that'll do it.
I think so.
We talked about a lot of movies. 1918. It's a whole slew of them. Anyway, what was your favorite, Glenn?
I mean, probably. You put me on the spot now.
We ask this every time, except I forgot to last time.
It is true. It is a thing that I think I came up with also. I'm gonna go ahead and say Soldier Arms, I guess.
Okay.
I don't think I like that like head and shoulders above the rest, but that one, for whatever reason, just feels like the right answer.
Did you like it like shoulder arms above the rest?
Sure, yeah.
Come on, that was great. Anyway, I liked Soldier Arms a lot, and I think at various times, because I watched them in this order, Soldier Arms was my favorite, and then I Don't Want to Be a Man was my favorite, because I thought it was like really light on its feet, and it had some interesting ideas and good laughs. But you might have gathered from how effusively I was talking about it, but I really liked Himmelskibet. I thought it was really cool.
I liked Himmelskibet. I didn't love it. I think I Don't Want to Be a Man, A Dog's Life, and Shoulder Arms I hold around this. Like all three of those I thought were really solid, enjoyable movies.
Nice. Well, thanks for listening to the podcast. You can subscribe to us on YouTube and on your podcast app if you like. You can follow us on the social medias, which you can see in the description of either the podcast or the YouTube. And I hope you stick along with us on this journey. And I hope you've learned something, because we have.
Indeed.
Well, that'll be about it. So, Glenn, I'll see you next year.
See you next year.
Who's in the best-selling show? Is there life on Mars?
Here's the Rocketeer. Wait, where are you?
Yeah, there it is.
there's the Rocketeer. I forgot to record the video.